Hello, everybody. I know we're just coming up on 10 o'clock here, Arizona time. Our webinar is going to be on revenue forecasts, and here we go. All right. Again, my name is Brigitte Hippel. Our webinar today is on revenue forecasts, so if you happen to be in the wrong call, I'll understand if you drop off. But otherwise, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. May not answer your question right away. If you have a very detailed question, very specific to your account, it may be better afterwards to go ahead and set up a separate training call with your account manager. They can go into all the specifics with you, everything that I'm going to cover. Our help guide does cover everything that I'm going to be talking about today. So if you ever need to look back, it is quite detailed on everything that's in there. And whoops. All right. So can you see my screen now? It seems like there's a little bit of a delay when my screen gets displayed. Hopefully you guys can hear me well. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We will be going through quite a detailed meeting today. It's got a lot of information in here. So hopefully, you know, everything with revenue forecast, it's the devil's in the details and what you might leave out in order for your forecast not to display. All right, so let me see. Perfect. All right, can everybody hear me fine? Hopefully so. All right, let's talk first about what the revenue forecast is as far as the way Workamajig defines it. The revenue forecast in Workamajig is really a snapshot of those financial budgets, those approved budgets, or even not necessarily approved budgets, those estimates within your projects, your campaigns, retainers, client invoices, and then how is that going to be spread out, that anticipated revenue for the next 12 months. It is literally a snapshot. It is not necessarily meant to be constantly updating the original report. It's meant to take a snapshot. I look at it maybe the 1st of November. I'll look at it again maybe the 1st of December, and I keep looking at it each month, and I will be able to begin to see a trend of revenue that we're going to be able to see over the next 12 months. Of course, eventually you can also compare it to previous forecasts that you had last year at this time. Are you on track? Same way. Are you doing better than last year? What months are looking a little bit lean for the future? So again, it's meant to be a snapshot. It's meant to be based on the estimated budgets that you have in your projects and your campaigns, and it's not going to be based on actuals. No actual transactions, no actual billing. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look just at a quick forecast that I have already set up. We're going to be going into this obviously in much more detail as we go through, but I wanted you to already have a view of what the revenue forecast looks like if you have not yet run one in your own system. So we have these different types. Approved campaigns, approved budgets. We'll do invoicing, opportunities, potential campaigns, potential projects, and retainers. These are the different types or the different items that can come into the revenue forecast. And each one of these will require some very specific setup. So if you ever run a revenue forecast and you start to look around and you think that some of your projects or your campaigns, etc., are not showing up in this forecast, then it really has to do with that setup and missing one or two of those detail items that are going to be needed in order to pull it in. So if you don't have that estimate, or you're not saying include in forecast, or you don't have that billing schedule, any one of those missing items could cause your item not to show up in the forecast. All right. Within those, then we start looking at kind of, you know, what was that budget? So let me back it up a little bit. What's the budget, that estimate that we have? And then how is that anticipated revenue? How are we going to be billing this specific project or campaign over the next 12 months? And so you can start to begin to see kind of, you know, over the next 12 months and even beyond that, if you have some very long projects, how is that revenue anticipated to be coming in? All right. Now we're definitely going to jump into detail about how these are displayed and what's showing up and how it's calculating all of the details. But I wanted it first to show you just kind of how those items are coming in. You can end up looking at your your revenue forecast by type. You can also, maybe group it by client because you'd rather see it by client or by account manager. And so you have different ways to kind of toggle and view that forecast. For our purposes today, we're really going to be looking at it by type because we're going to need to make sure that we discuss the different ways that you can bring your campaigns and your projects in, and then how do they come into these different categories. All right. So let's go back to our revenue forecast. The overview does show you and talk to you about all those different types that we have. Then we start getting into the setup. How do we create new ones? And then how do we manage those forecasts? Let's kind of look at the setup for revenue forecasts. System setup first, of course, there are security rights. Are you going to be the one creating the revenue forecast? Are you viewing them? Are you going to be able to review them as an AE? Because we do have that option that you can actually send your revenue forecast to your different account managers where they can review the budget information. Do they have this set up correctly? Has something changed in this? Where they can review just their specific projects and campaigns to make sure everything's set up correctly, and then they can approve it or make changes to it, which will then allow you and notify you that you need to actually update your forecast and refresh it. So there are system security rights set up in here. Okay. If we go into project setup, so this is when we're really kind of going into this forecast and looking at how do we bring these approved projects or any of our projects into the revenue forecast. Now, we're not going to go into the detail initially about, whether we're spreading expenses or how all of the calculations are done exactly. We're going to be kind of first looking at that initial setup. How do I make sure that my different items are going to be pulled into this forecast? Okay. So if we go ahead and look at the setup, the first thing we're really looking at for projects is the project status code. So if we go to system setup, go to the global list, project status codes. I've got some different project status codes, both estimating and production, that I say I want to include in the forecast. So it might be something that, hey, it's still in the pipeline. We're still working on it. We don't have a finalized estimate on it yet, but that's okay. I still want to include it in my forecast. For the same token, if something's final build or completed, I probably don't necessarily want to bring those into the forecast because there's really, especially if it's final build, there's nothing more to build. There's no more anticipated revenue. So this is where you can kind of look at your different project status codes, determine whether it's going to be included in forecast or not. And I created one down here just because of all of the junk that I have in my test account called forecast production. Makes it a little bit easier for me to kind of control the data that's showing up in my revenue forecast. So all of my projects and so forth, my opportunities are going to be in this project status code, include in forecast, which is actually marked yes. So those are going to be pulling into the forecast. Now I call this basically the gatekeeper for projects. This is the first, projects and opportunities. And I'm not sure necessarily whether you do opportunities or not, or whether you're just using projects and you set them in an estimating stage while you're waiting for your client to approve the estimate. But either way, project status codes is that first gatekeeper that says, okay, if you are not in the right status code, I'm not even going to consider anything else about that project or opportunity to come into the revenue forecast. So if we come over to my forecast and we look at this first project, okay, I'm in the right project status. I also have an estimate because the system needs that budget information. So 10,007, I have an approved estimate. Next, what the system looks for is its billing method, because the billing method is how the system determines how it's going to spread that estimate, that budget information across in the forecast. So if I come into billing options, we have, of course, this project is set up as a fixed fee. We have, of course, time and materials and retainers. Now, retainers are handled completely separately. So I'm going to ignore retainers at the moment. We're going to be looking at both fixed fee and time and materials. And we're going to also address this extra checkbox because we know that that makes a difference for fixed fee projects. So this project is in the right status. It has an approved estimate. The billing method, third factor in this, is its fixed fee. That's telling the system that I'm going to be using a billing schedule to spread that income, my budget, across into the various months. This is how the system is going to know. So this forecast started in October, so it knows that November, December, and January, it's going to be billing $2,680. It's already billed, it back in August, or hopefully I billed $2,680 in August. It's taking that full budget. So if we kind of come over and look at this, there's that 10,007, and here's the different months it's falling into: November, December, and January. So it's pretty simple the way the system works once all of the dominoes, the pieces are all lined up correctly. If I come down to this last project, I'm again in the right project status code. I have an estimate that is approved. It's for 14.4. It is in the project settings. Billing methods set up as time and materials. Now I do not need a billing schedule. It's still going to use my budget amount, but on a time and materials project, it's actually using my project schedule. So it says, well, generally on time and materials, depending on where you're working and where you're working the most, is how it's going to determine how it's splitting up that budget amount across the schedule. So if I start this project, today, November 10th, I'm going to finish it on December 16th. It's not the full month of November, nor is it the full month of December, but it's basically going to take that budget amount and it's going to spread it across both November and December. And when it comes to time and materials, it's actually looking at the number of days. How many days are in November with how much of the budget is within those days? And then December, how much of that budget is falling in to December? So it is breaking it up. You're not going to see an even split. It's just using your schedule, and it's actually counting the number of days. Okay. We also have this other fixed fee project. Again, it's in the right status. It's in the estimate. My estimate is approved. Okay. But if we look at this estimate, it's got labor at $88.45 and it has expenses at $3,960. I know, some interesting odd numbers I put in there, but if I look at the billing method, this time I'm using expenses not included. For those of you who do fixed fee billing and you use this field, you know that when you get to your billing schedule, the system is actually only using your labor budget, because it says, well, when you check that box, you're not billing the anticipated or budgeted expenses. You're only billing the budgeted labor, and then you're going to be billing the actual expenses that come in. So the billing schedule, when you set that up, is actually going off of the total labor amount. Okay, that's exactly what it's going to be doing in the fixed fee. Now we're going to talk about what happens to those expenses, because what are we doing with those expenses? But as far as the labor portion is concerned, it's only looking at the labor budget on a fixed fee when you check that box. So if you just think very similar to the way fixed fee projects are billed, that's exactly the same way it's treating it in the revenue forecast. All right. I have a question. This isn't really forecast related, but how are those billing schedule invoices populated? I've tried out a billing schedule and no invoice was generated, and accounting didn't get any notification that an invoice is ready to generate. So that might become a little bit more of a question on how you're doing your billing. Are you doing billing worksheets? Are you doing mass billing? What the billing schedule really does is it just tells the system how much do you want to bill. it won't auto-generate an invoice, just like it won't auto-generate anything in here. It's just telling you this is what you say you want to bill. So when you get to your actual billing, it will bring that actual amount in, whether you're doing mass billing or billing worksheets, and it will read that billing schedule and say, okay, I know you're supposed to bill this. This is how much you're supposed to bill. That's the same thing it's doing in the forecast. Okay. Now, the big difference between an approved project, and if we come down and look at, we have potential project. Okay, so if we're going back to our revenue setup, we're going through all of this project information in here. It's looking at the billing method, it's looking at the status codes, what is it reading to pull in? So that information is all within the system here. Okay. If I go and look at the forecast and we look at a potential project, the only difference between an approved project and a potential project is that estimate is not yet approved. So again, if you're going back when you go to generate your revenue forecast, if you want to bring those projects in that are in estimating maybe, and you're still trying to get that budget approved, you can still pull them into your forecast. They just come in a different category than the approved one. These are the ones that you know are in production. My team's working on them. The client's already signed off. These are the ones where the estimate is not yet approved. So if I come in and look at this one, my estimating still has to be include in forecast. So that was a yes, still says include in forecast. When I come to the estimate now, it is not yet approved. But in my estimate, I may have 3 or 4 different estimates I've been trying to send out to the client and trying to get them to approve one. But out of all of those estimates, I know that there's one that I believe they're going to approve. So in that estimate, I can come into the estimate settings, and there's a box that says include this specific estimate into the forecast. I know it's not yet approved, but out of the ones that I have listed here, this is the one that I think it's going to be probably the one approved. Okay, so you must check this box. That's the extra step that needs to be done in order to show up in a revenue forecast as a potential to tell the system, okay, I am in the right status. I have an estimate. It's not yet approved, but I do want you to include this. Now, of course, since the project is not yet approved and you don't have that budget, when you're doing time and materials, now you can put in a billing schedule if you want, but most people think, I don't really have a billing schedule yet because we don't even have this approved. So if I have this set as time and materials, it's going to use the project schedule once again. And this is an old schedule, but it's going to use that project schedule. For some reason, these dates didn't move, but it's going to use these project schedules to bring in that estimate. All right. That's what we consider as a potential project. And here's one that's a little bit more current. So again, my estimate is not approved. It's for 14/4. When I come into the schedule, it's set for November through January 6th. So when I look at the estimate, or my revenue forecast is coming in as November, December. The majority of it's in December, and then a small portion of that is in January. Okay. So that's approved projects and potential projects. Any questions about those at all? All right. And again, this will be recorded. All the details is in the help guide. So if we go back to our setup, our help guide, now we come down to opportunities. For those of you who do want to bring your opportunities into the forecast, or are actually using opportunities and are comfortable with those, when you come in and look at the forecast, so let's come down and we'll look at opportunities here. You know that there's 2 different types of opportunities. First off, my basic opportunity. I have not enabled the advanced features. If I don't, that's fine. Those opportunities can still come in. They're going to be listed under as an opportunity. I know they're not yet approved. They're not a project that's live, but I have a basic opportunity in here. When you click in and edit the details, the system is really using this amount right here. Okay. And it's basically saying, well, it's actually Yeah, because I've got 80%. So what it's using is the total revenue. Now, whether I've got production costs or just a total revenue amount, doesn't matter. It's looking at the total revenue. When we get into start talking again about how do we anticipate spread those expenses, we're going to be looking at that in more detail. That's when we're going to kind of talk about this $5,000 difference right here. And so if we're looking at this $25,000, now we start looking at these three other fields. These three fields must be set up in order for the opportunity to know, one, I'm going to be included based on its probability. When do I think it may start? And how long do I think this project will take? So you will need all four of these in order for that opportunity to show up in your revenue forecast. So let's talk about the probability field. I know that a lot of people who use opportunities for just straight opportunities may actually use the probability field to say, what's the probability I may actually win this opportunity? And that's fine. If you're not using revenue forecast and that's how you're consistently using the probability field, you know, so long as you understand that that's how it's being used. For revenue forecast, it's actually saying, what's the probability that I'm going to get the full $25,000? Am I pitching this a little high? Do I think I'm spot on? Should I set that to 100%? It's actually taking 80% of the 2,500 is why it's coming up with the 20,000. Okay, so it's using a percentage to say, of this revenue, what's the probability I'm going to get all of it? Well, probably about 80%, because I know I'm kind of pitching high and he's kind of talking a little bit low. And so as this probability changes, that can affect the total revenue seen within the forecast. Of course, I'm going to forecast close this on the 1st. It's going to spread over 3 months. And that's basically what's happening here. Okay. Let's see. If I want to pre-bill half at the beginning of the project and send a final invoice once the project is completed, how would I set that up? So that's really a billing call. I mean, you can do advance bills. That's when you're setting up a billing schedule and you would say, I want to do an advance bill for 50% up front, and then you would do revenue recognition at the end for 100%. Advance bills don't come into the revenue forecast. It is only looking at when do you plan on billing that revenue. Okay, so advance bills won't show up in here at all, and it won't be read by the billing schedule. So you can put in your billing schedule that you're going to pre-bill 50% up front as an advance bill. All that the revenue forecast is going to look at is the revenue portion. All right. Now we know that we've got the other opportunity, the one where we've actually created and enabled those advanced features, where you now have a schedule. Now you have a project status. So once again, that project status needs to be, and I probably should have kept this one in estimating, it still would have been included in the forecast, but the system's going to look at this still as an opportunity. It's an opportunity project. It is still an opportunity. So even though the system generates this pseudo project called Opti, it really is still considered an opportunity, and we wanted to categorize those still under opportunity. So you can see a basic one, and then you can see the advanced one. Now on an advanced one, it's going to look at that estimate. Now, once again, you may have 3, 4, 5 different estimates. None of them are approved yet, because of course you're still doing that pitch. If it were approved, then you'd be making this live and you'd be converting this opportunity to a live project. But once again, just like the potential project, when you go into that estimate, you're going to want to go into the estimate settings and determine that this is the estimate I want included in my forecast. Okay. Otherwise, it treats it very similar to, the potential project. Of course, the project settings, there's no true billing options. I mean, it's going to list as time and materials or fixed fee, but either way, it's going to use the schedule, because you can't set up a billing schedule yet in an opportunity. You don't even know when you might win this opportunity and when you're going to be billing. But once again, it's going to be looking at your project schedule. running from November through almost the complete December. And then when it comes into the opportunity, that's basically what it's doing in here. All right. So that's opportunity. So we've got approved projects, we've got potential projects, we've got our opportunities. Now let's go and look at those campaigns. So we've got approved campaigns and potential campaigns. Now this was the big change that we had last summer. Was it just last summer or this summer? Whichever it was. Excuse me. Where we made some changes to campaigns. One, for mass billing worksheets, and including the revenue forecast. So a campaign. If you're unfamiliar with some of the changes that we've made to campaign, it really is related to how campaigns can be built. You have the ability to set a campaign budget. Okay, so I've got an estimate. Once again, for this campaign estimate, I've got $135,000. When I go into the campaign settings, and this is what was new, is we actually are telling the system we want to use that campaign budget, that $135,000. Doesn't matter how many projects I have listed or whether those projects have their own individual budgets, I'm actually billing this estimate. And that's what this is doing. I'm billing by campaign, and I'm going to use the campaign budget to bill, which then says, okay, now I have a billing schedule. Once again, it's reading that billing schedule. Now, the one big difference between projects versus campaigns is campaigns don't have a project status codes. Project status codes are only based on projects. For campaigns, in order to be included in the revenue forecast, they're auto-included if you have an estimate and you're billing by campaign budget and you have a billing schedule. So the only thing it's missing is a project status code. It will get auto-included if you have those specific items. Okay, you can always choose not to include them in your forecast when you generate that forecast, because those items all show up and says, what do you want to include in there? But in order to include them, it's not going to look at the project status code because there isn't one, but it is just basically going to say, do you have an approved estimate? Are you billing the campaign budget? And within that, do you have a billing schedule? So if I come and look at that approved campaign, I have my approved budget, and then I have it set for the 4 months that I'm going to anticipate billing the budget. Okay. Approved campaign, just like a fixed fee project. So once again, if you're doing fixed fee projects, I have an estimate. And in this estimate instead, I have $110,000 of labor and $25,000 of expenses. So when I come over to my campaign settings, I can still use the campaign budget. I'm still billing off of that estimate, but this time I'm saying don't include the expenses in there. So when I look at my billing schedule, it's actually a total of the $110,000, not of the total $135,000 budget. Okay, so just like fixed fee projects, when you check that box, it's just going to bill the labor portion of the budget. Same thing with campaigns. It says, I know that on my projects, I'm going to have those actual expenses coming in, and we're going to bill the actual expenses. So the only thing I want to do on my budget portion when I bill is the labor portion. All right. If you guys are unfamiliar with that, you might not have that situation in your instance, and that's fine. But for those who are already using that, it works the same way. Fixed fee projects, fixed fee campaigns, it's reading whether that expenses are not included, meaning don't include the budgeted expenses, because when I get to billing, I'm going to bill my actual expenses, my actual transactions, and yet I'm only going to bill the labor portion of my budget. Okay. So that's what's going to happen in my forecast over here. It's reading that, just that I'm going to bill the budgeted portion. Okay. Now, as we get down to potential campaigns, I'm sure you kind of guessed it. The only difference is the estimate is not yet approved. So I may have an estimate in here. Once again, it's not yet been approved. It's $125,000, but in my estimate settings, I've got include in forecast checked, because once again, you may have multiple estimates. If you do have multiple estimates and one is a change order, and or you've got two different estimates and you want them both included, it will actually, if you check the box in more than one estimate, it's actually going to add the numbers together to make your current budget. Okay. And then once again, I will have my campaign. It's still set up to use the campaign budget. I have my anticipated budget schedule, billing schedule. Even though I haven't yet got this approved, this may adjust once we finalize everything. But as I set this up, then that's what I'm going to see in my forecast. All right. So the question is, do you actually have to manually put in the schedule? Yes, because the system has no idea when you want to bill or not. Now, we do have a feature within the system that, and we'll talk about this a little bit in more detail, where you can actually say in your billing options, in your billing schedule, nope, it's my other one. I do this wrong each time, project settings, billing schedule, billing options. I have two different options and we'll go into those at the end. If I don't want to use a billing schedule, can I just use my project schedule for fixed fee? Yes. And vice versa. I have time and material projects, but that's not really how I bill. Can I put in a billing schedule and have it read my billing schedule? Yes, you can. Those would just be for revenue forecast, how it's going to read for the revenue forecast. So we will definitely go into that in more detail at the end. Sorry, excuse me. All right. So now we have our approved campaigns, our approved projects, our potential our opportunities, our potential campaigns, and our potential projects. The last two are the easiest. If you have any scheduled invoices, some of my clients will set up a scheduled invoice. They have an invoice that has to generate each month the same way. They've got certain verbiage in there. They've got it set up a certain way. They don't want to have to recreate the wheel every single time. So they actually set up a scheduled invoice. So if I come in and look at this invoice, it basically says, I'm going to be billing $1,500. And when I go and look at the schedule will tell me that I'm going to be doing this for another 3 more months. I actually started it back in July. I've got 3 more months remaining, and that's what it's going to show up in my revenue forecast. Okay. It's very simple. Those are probably the easiest ones. And then, of course, as we get down here, let's close these up. Let's come down to retainer. Retainer works very similar to like the way the basic opportunity works. I have the retainer amount. What am I going to bill per period? It does not look at anything as far as what is maybe considered extras. It's just solely going off of the retainer amount, the number of periods, how many periods are remaining, and when is it supposed to start. And that's exactly all that you're going to see for retainers, because it's a contractual amount that you've agreed upon that is going to show up in your forecast each month. Okay. All right. Is there an option to not include scheduled invoices in the forecast? Yes. So when you go to create your first revenue forecast, in fact, that's what we're going to do next, you have the option to say, what am I including in that or not? So you can exclude scheduled invoices. So if a project is part of a campaign, it won't pull those individual projects under approved projects, correct? So if you have your project set up in a campaign, and if in that campaign settings, you're saying that you're actually billing the campaign and using the campaign budget, so you're billing this a fixed amount, then it does not matter what your projects are or whether they have individual budgets or not, and whether they're in production and production is to be included in the forecast. It doesn't matter. They won't be pulled in. They will be ignored because it knows that you're actually billing a fixed amount of the campaign budget. Okay. If you came into your campaign and said, I'm actually billing the individual projects, then the system's going to ignore the approved campaign, and it's going to read each individual project however they are set for their billing method. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Perfect. All right. So let's go in and talk about creating that first revenue forecast. Now, on your Today Accounting page, you've got the plus sign here. You can come down and create a revenue forecast. You've got the plus sign here. And as anybody knows who, is part of my clients, I'm always utilizing this. I love this feature. You can come down and create a revenue forecast here. It's going to open the exact same screen. Once you've created your revenue forecast, they will show up under your views, revenue forecasts. You'll be able to see all of those revenue forecasts. So as we go ahead and create that first revenue forecast, the title. I generally suggest that when you go to create your forecast, use the date. And you're going to see in the list of forecasts, when you're running through them, the title of just saying monthly revenue or something isn't very helpful, because then you'd have to bring in the date created view or something to say when did it really start. So I generally like to have the title. So, whether I say, 2021 forecast, I generally tend to put the month. If I'm creating one monthly, then I will put the month and the year on there. And then you'll be able to see a nice list of all your forecasts based on an easy find to look back. I do have multiple GL companies set up, so that's something that you guys might not have. The starting year. I can start this as of next year. So if you have projects, because some of my clients do have projects that, go a couple of years and you want to actually start this in January 2020, that's fine. It's just saying, when do you want me to start that 12-month period, that rolling 12 months? The starting month, I'm going to go ahead and start this in November. But since we're halfway into November, some people may say, I'm not going to start this, and I'm going to start it going with December forward, because we got billing already going on this month, and that's fine. Just knowing when you're creating it versus what's that first starting month, and then it goes 12 months out from there. This is where you get to decide what's included. Am I including those opportunities? If you don't do opportunities and you have none, it doesn't matter that it's checked. It's just not going to find any to bring in. But if you decide you only want to deal with your approved projects and your approved campaigns and not see anything that's still in the pipeline, and include those retainers, that's up to you. You can select as few items as you want. Okay. You can even, once your revenue forecast is created, have that option to turn around and bring them in if you accidentally forgot and didn't bring them in the first time. This is where we're going to start really talking about those expenses and where do you want those expenses. And when I talk about expenses, we're talking about budgeted expenses. This is, again, not based on anything actual in the system, but just the budget. So for a lot of my clients, they say, well, my expenses are just pass-throughs. Even though I have it in my budget, I really want to just plain exclude the expenses because we don't make any money off of them. So why even bring them into the equation? Only look at my labor budgets. I may end up saying, well, you know what? Most of my expenses come in at the end. When the project is almost complete, then the vendor's getting the product back to me. I'm getting it back from printing, etc. I may want, because I do have a markup on my expenses, and I'd like to see that revenue from that, but I might want to see them more at the end of the project. Do I want it all at the beginning? I'm front heavy on my expenses, or do I just want it kind of spread evenly across? Now, if you create any of your budgets and you actually put your expenses to a specific task, the system's actually going to read the task dates to know where to spread those expenses. Okay, it's not going to look at the start or the end or, evenly. The only thing you could do possibly is exclude it. Otherwise, if you do include it and you link it to a task, it's actually going to look at the dates of the task. All right. Is there an option to, or let's see, can you do specific forecasts for office? You can display the office field within the forecast, but you cannot limit just for a specific office. Okay, so you would be able to see the office field within the forecast, but you cannot just run the forecast for only a specific office. And let's see, when expenses have markup, will it remove the expense but show the markup? So in the forecast, and I'll show you this, it's actually going to have all three. It's going to show you the gross amount, the billable amount. It's going to show you the net amount. So it won't actually show you the markup, it'll show you the net. And then it will also show you the profit. Gross minus the net gives you the profit. And so in the profit column is where you would actually see the amount made, the revenue made off of that expense. Okay. All right, so whether you want to include expenses or not. Now, if you exclude expenses and check this box, once those expenses are excluded, they cannot be re-added later on. You would have to run a new revenue forecast to include the expenses. If you choose any of the three above, you'll be able to toggle between those once your forecast is created to say, well, I really want them at the end. No, I want them in the middle. I want them spread evenly. You'll be able to toggle between those because the expenses are already in there. It's just a view on what month they're showing up. But once they're excluded, and you'd have to create a new revenue forecast. This is that option, kind of that I showed you in the project. Hey, I'd like to see all my fixed fee projects based on my project schedule. I don't want to bother to put in a billing schedule. So this is that option where you can kind of set it across the board for fixed fee projects to look at the project schedule. And then I wouldn't even need a billing schedule in there. Okay. If I go ahead and come down and save, now when this is generating, especially depending on the quantity and the volume of projects that you have in there, you notice it does take a little bit to open up that forecast. It's got a lot of calculations it's doing, and depending on how much data and how many different projects, campaigns, etc., it needs to bring in, it does go through a lot of calculations. So just be aware, don't be impatient with it. It's pretty good. Mine is pretty short. I've really limited what's brought in here, but if I do it on some of my other projects, then it really kind of gets bogged down for a little bit as it goes through these calculations. So as we know that we've kind of looked at some of these projects, but let's look at some of the other areas within this forecast first. So we've got that we know that we started it on November 21st. This is what we call the forecast. We're currently spreading the expenses evenly. If I click into this, you notice that I can update the name. So if I misspelled something or I need to change the name, I can do that. I can also change the expenses. But again, once you click on exclude, those expenses are excluded and you can't get them back in this forecast. But I can toggle between them and say, well, what would it look like if I kind of move them all to the end or to the middle, etc. I'm grouping by type right now. It's easy for me to be able to identify these. Otherwise, if I'm looking at this by client or grouping by office, or grouping by account manager, again, depending on how I want to view that. So if I group by client and I save, now I'm looking at each individual client and I'm able to see the revenue that I'm possibly going to get from each of these clients. Of course, as I look in my grid further down here, I have the client field also listed here. So even if I were looking at it by type, I would still be able to see who the client is in this grid view. Okay. Speaking of the grid view, there are different fields within here that maybe you say, I don't need. The probability on any project or campaign is automatically defaulted to 100% because it says I'm taking 100% of that budget. The only time that the probability field comes into play is on opportunities, and it affects the amount of that budget based on that probability percentage. So if you're not using opportunities or you're not bringing them in, you can come over here to the detail grid settings and edit the columns that are being displayed. So here are all the columns that are being displayed. And of course, like any other screens, you can change the display order. And so if you didn't want to see the probability field, kind of less fields better, makes it easier to look at, you can control the columns and the order that they're displayed in. Let's see. Can you repeat what you said about running this by office versus the entire company? Thanks. Sure. So when you create a new revenue forecast, oh, I can't do that from there. When you create a new revenue forecast, you cannot choose to run a forecast just for a single office. That's not one of the filters. However, you do have a filters, you do have an option to group by office. So I'd like to see all my projects by that specific office. And you also have in your grid view that you can just bring in the office field if you just want to know which office that belongs to. So hopefully that answered your question. All right, perfect. So the grid view, so if you notice under the More button, once again, I always say, look under the More button. You never know how many different options that you have within there, okay? The update forecast. The update forecast has really to do with the fact that in your system, in your revenue forecast, okay, you've got this option in here for sending your forecast, these different projects, and I could send these different projects and I can actually notify the account manager on the project to review their revenue forecast. Now, all they're going to see is the projects or the campaigns that they are responsible for. They're not going to see the entire thing. And really what it's asking them to do is to say, when you look at that budget, is this still accurate? Is this still accurate as to when you think you're going to be able to bill this? Because I'm looking at the forecast right now, and this is what you have currently set up. So if I go ahead and send this, what it basically does is it sends to those account managers, puts it in their bell notification, sends out an email to say, hey, you have a forecast that you need to review. And so when I come across here and I look, now you can see it's been sent out. When the account manager reviews it, if they make any changes to the budget information, the system will recognize that the budget was changed and it will actually come in here. So once they approve it and send it back, it will come back in here and tell you automatically whether this needs to be regenerated or not. Hey, the account manager made some changes to the budget. They updated some information. It needs to be regenerated. Then you can come in and update the forecast and it will go out and relook at the new budget and the billing schedule. Now, it is not looking at changes to project schedules. It's looking at budget information and saying, did something in the budget change? So if you have an issue where somebody says, well, you know what, I completely changed the project schedule, we're not starting it for another month or two, and I really have some changes, let's say on a regular time and material project, what you can do is go ahead and select it, delete it from the worksheet. Then once you've deleted that, then you can come back and say, go back and find the new items again. And at this point, once again, you can cherry pick and say, oh, I just have some approved projects I need to bring in, and let the system recalculate based on the new schedule and maybe the new budget and what you've set up in there, and let it be brought back in. So if you have a lot of changes in that sense, I would delete it from the worksheet, bring it back in, and let it recalculate correctly. So just remember that the update is really only dealing with budget information. Okay. You can create a financial budget. So if it's the end of the year, you've done a forecast and you've been seeing these trends over the years, you can actually create financial budgets. If you haven't utilized financial budgets in our system, you can create a company-wide budget for the company itself, or what this would do is actually create financial budgets per client. And so if you've got a lot of the same recurring clients every year and you want to kind of see, against a budget, how are they going to do for next year, you can create a financial budget directly from your forecast. And then when you run like the client P&L, you'll be able to use that financial budget and to do a comparison. Okay. Let's see. Is there no way to filter forecasts by a single client if only want to see one client or just a few versus all, something similar to reporting? No, the revenue forecast is really meant to give you an overall snapshot of the revenue. Now, you do have an easy option that if you want to come in and turn around and view this by client, go and delete all the rest of the clients, just select all except those few. You can pare this down to just a single client. Well, and you actually do have the option. So let me close this forecast. When you create a new revenue forecast, you can look by a specific client. So I apologize, I take that back. You can look by a specific client or even just a parent client and create the forecast for that. Okay, let's see. Here's my forecast. In security settings, do the account managers need forecast view, modify, access to review? They need the view and the modify, yes. So again, in the setup, you'll want to review the security settings because it does mention if you're allowing your AEs to review those forecasts. Okay, and also too, when you're in the system settings area for notifications, I believe revenue forecasts are in here. Maybe they're not. They come in automatically. So that's more based on a security setting. Okay. Back to the more button, create the budget. This add an adjustment. If you have any questions about it, it is listed in the help guide. I'm not going to go into it in detail right now. It's just an ability to adjust things. We've talked about finding new items. If you notice in my view, I also have currency. So if you happen to be using multi-currency in the system, so for those of you who don't have multi-currency turned on, you're not seeing the currency option, but you do have the ability to either see all of your projects and campaigns in your home currency, or you can actually toggle and say, I would just like to see my Canadian projects in here based on Canadian budgets and Canadian amounts. So if you've got a separate GL company set up for a different currency, you would be able to see that foreign currency or your revenue forecast in that foreign currency. Okay. And of course, there's that currency field. So if in your grid view, you're not dealing with currency, once again, you don't need to display that in your grid. You also have the ability to print your forecast. It is pretty wide, pretty long, but if you want to move it to Excel because you want to do something with it, pivot tables or whatever you're doing, but you do have the ability to print that. And that's, again, another reason why you might consider the columns that you're displaying. Now, in the grid view, you cannot change the number of months. You cannot change the order that those are in. So that grid view, when you do want to edit that, there's only certain fields that you can edit as far as the order that they're in and whether to display them or not. Okay. If we come down to our grid view, we've got our start month. So again, when does my project schedule start, or when does my opportunity, that forecasted close date, what was my invoice start date? It's just that the number of months that it's anticipated to go on for. Okay, of course, that billing is just showing you whether your project is fixed fee or time and materials. Otherwise, once again, if you do everything fixed fee, then this is one more field that you don't need to display in your grid, because the only ones it's affecting are your projects. Is it considered fixed fee or is it considered time and materials, which will make a difference on how it's displaying in your grid view. Okay. The total, of course, is that total budget. The prior. So if your project started in October, although my forecast doesn't start till November, it's taking those prior months that are not visible and putting the entire amount in the prior. So if it's 2 months worth, 3 months worth, 6 months worth, it's the total of all that budget that is landing prior to November is going to show up in the prior amount. Okay. Actual billing, this is a display field. It's going to show you all that was actually billed on the project or on the campaign, but it will have no bearing on the months that it's displaying. So let's say now we created this October 10th, we created this today, and although I may have already done my November billing, November is still going to show up in here because I began my forecast in November and my billing schedule said November. So it's going to show me what was anticipated to be billed. Now, whether I actually billed already or not will not reduce the November number, because all that the months are showing, of course, is based on my budget and my billing schedule or the project schedule. It doesn't care actual billing. So all this is trying to do is give you an information of, hey, this is what's already been billed on this project, regardless of whether that's what I actually billed or not within here. Okay. And of course, we have our different months. Now, if you've noticed, some of these will show up with some interesting numbers within here. And what it's basically doing, like on this time and materials, my total budget is $14,430. And in this one, I believe, I'm spreading my expenses evenly. So if we come in and look at this estimate, my total budget was the 14, but 3,400 of it was expenses. So if I were to exclude expenses in my forecast, then my total budget would be actually just the labor portion, only 11,000, and then that would be spread over my schedule. Now that I have expenses included in it, the system is saying, okay, I'm going to take the total of the budget and I'm going to look at the project schedule, but in addition, I'm also going to spread those expenses evenly across the number of days of this project schedule. Okay, now if I were to come in and say, let's put the expenses at the end, okay, that's going to shift $3,400 of it and move it over to here. And if I go ahead and save, it's actually shifting those expenses just to the end. If I click into the month, I will be able to see my estimate. So I actually estimated down to the service and item level. And it's saying, okay, it's looking at the dates within the project, the task, the schedule, and saying, okay, this is what I budgeted for these different services. And these are the dates that are being brought in. So it's having to look at every single day of that schedule. Here's the expenses, or no, there's not the expenses, sorry. So this is how it's figuring out how much to include, because it's looking at each task and each item. Okay, when I go and look at the expenses or the last month, you're going to see that the entire expenses, there were 2 different expenses, and it's all showing up in the last period. Okay, and it's spreading it across that. And then here it is, the rest of my budget by item. So if you're ever wondering how it's doing those calculations, you have that ability to drill in to see how it's doing the calculation. And it's depending on how you set up your estimate. If you went all the way down to that item level, then when it does that calculation, it also has to go all the way down to that item level. A lot of calculations, like I said, going into all of these. Of course, if you're just looking at this, even though it's looking at a billing schedule and it's saying I'm going to bill $26.80 for that month, it still has to look at each of the different services and how is it pulling that calculation in for those services to make up that $26.80. It just doesn't take a lump sum amount and go, there's $26.80. It's actually bringing it all the way down to this level. Because if you think about it, again, you can create that financial budget and your different services may actually be going to different income accounts. And so therefore the system needs to look at it down to this level in order to create your financial budgets, also down to the different GL account levels. Maybe more information in here than you guys wanted to know about, but once you start to create these forecasts yourself and start to understand what you're clicking into and how things are displaying, makes it a little bit easier to kind of understand why numbers are showing up the way that they are. If you notice too, we have gross. This is what 90% of my clients look at. Most of them aren't looking at net or profit. They're just looking at gross. What is that anticipated gross revenue that I'm going to be able to bill based on my project budgets and the schedules I've created? If I go over to net, now you're going to notice negative amounts. This is where that markup, so what's that net expense or even the net labor? So let's talk expense first. If I have a, let's go look at, where was my expense in here? So I had those expenses and I actually, so this is the net that it was going to cost me that I was going to have to bill the vendor, or the vendor was going to bill me, I should say. Okay. But when I go back and I look at it in gross and I come back in, this is what I get to bill the client. When I get down to profit, it's actually taking the difference and it's actually going to show you both. It's going to show you the gross, then it's going to show you the net in order to show you the profit. So it shows you both numbers in the profit area. Now, when we talk about net for labor is based on the estimate and the budget. Okay, it's not based on the hourly cost you may or may not have sitting in the employee record. So if we come over to our system setup and you go to your billing options in your list of services, so if I look at account management, there is an hourly cost field. So this has to do with estimates only, being able to see a labor net in an estimate, because in an estimate you'll say, well, I need 5 hours of account management time and 4 hours of copywriting and a graphic designer, but I don't have specific people yet, so there's no way to go out to that employee record and pull up that actual hourly cost. This hourly cost is really a blended rate between all of my account managers. Kind of what's that hourly cost between all of my account managers? That is what's being used within my forecast over here. So when I come in and look at November, I have basically, 2/4 of an hour or a half an hour total of account management time. And so it's picking up that negative $25. So even though when I look at gross and I look at the billable, well, you can't see in here, the billable rate of my, I should look at somebody other than a copyright or a campaign. So let's come into here. So my account management, if I look here, it's basically like $135 billable to the client. So this is a half hour's worth. But then when I come over and I look at the net and I come back in, now it's looking at that $25, half of that blended hourly cost in the service. And that's then able to give me that profit. Okay, and back down here. And so I'll see both that $135, that negative 50, the net cost, in order to get me my net profit. All right. Most of my clients just look at gross because they know that the net really is, a blended rate, not giving them a true net. And then of course, profit is, working off of that. So most of my clients just look at gross, but you do have the option to look at all of them. As you noticed, when you click on the name, it does open up, the campaign or the project or the budget, whatever it is. You also have an option over here that I just want to open up the budget. So that's actually opening up just the budget information if I wanted to see what this budget information was. Okay. And then if I click on the budget itself, it actually opens up the estimate. So if you make changes to this, you will need to go and update your forecast. Okay. Same thing here. It's opening up the budget information. If I come down and click on this, it's just showing you the invoice details of when it's going to run. If you actually want to look at the invoice itself, you have to click on the invoice number. Same thing down here. If I click on this, it's just showing up that opportunity panel from within the opportunity. And again, if you make changes here, it will be updating your opportunity and you will want to update your forecast. Retainer. it's just going to open up this panel. Once again, if you do make some changes here, it will actually be updating your retainer. Okay. If you notice, you have that notify where it goes out. If you just want to say that they've been reviewed, if you just want to mark that it's been sent, a lot of people just ignore it. They never even bothered to send it. They just look at it. They just keep creating that new revenue forecast each month and just kind of watch the trends as they go, see what's changing, what's not. Okay. Of course, when I come over to my accounting and I come down and I look at my revenue forecasts and I review them, you notice that it's looking at the name. I pulled out the date created. So if you're not using the date in the name, then you'll want to pull out this field just so that you can make sure that you're looking at the right forecast based on year and date, etc. Okay. Anybody have any last questions? Otherwise, again, if you do, don't hesitate to create a meeting, schedule a meeting with your account manager. They'll be able to review all of this information with you. And otherwise, the recording will be up in the website or up on the help guide, I should say, as soon as it's through recording. All right. Appreciate your patience and any questions that you guys had. It was great speaking with you guys. Thank you.